This video is going to talk about my plan for how I'm going to set up a complete food production system with a cycle that can be maintained for a very long period of time and won't require very much input while producing high quality, large quantities of food, variety of different types of food with all the nutrients that a person needs to live on and enjoy. Of course, I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but I'm including all of the ideas that I think are the most important ideas for what I would be trying to do with it. The main goals here would be to have a system that is mostly automated so that you can reduce the human work to absolute minimum, and what parts would normally require human work could possibly be done by some type of machine, or if it's complicated work then it might need to be controlled by a computer or a robot of some kind. But most of it's pretty simple. I think if you can get it down to where all the human has to do is just plant and harvest, that would be great, or if you can get it down to where all the human has to do is just consume the food that's produced, that would be even better. And I also wanted to design a system that keeps the required inputs to an absolute minimum, so that basically the system is taking in air and water and sunlight from the environment around it, and aside from that it should require very little other inputs, just minerals that are being depleted from the system, which over a longer cycle this system could actually bring those minerals back in, but yeah, that would be over a longer cycle. So at the heart of the system that I have designed here is a large greenhouse with an aquaponics system inside, and that starts with the fish pond, which should be a pretty large body of water to maintain a stable temperature and chemistry. And of course you can grow several different types of fish. I think catfish or trout or bluegill for a temperate climate probably are some of the best choices. Also yellow perch, some types of bass, and I also have here a drawing of a crayfish. I think these could be included at the bottom of the fish tank to eat it. I don't know if there would be very many dead fish in the system because you're going to be harvesting, but if there's any dead fish or waste food that the fish didn't eat, this can clean that up and turn it into meat for you. Also in the fish pond are deep water culture rafts, which are just rafts for like a plant bed that floats on the water. This is good for types of plants like watercress or lettuce that can do well with having their roots wet all the time. Water from the fish tank, like in a typical aquaponic system, will cycle back and forth to media-filled flood and drain grow beds, basically large boxes of gravel with pipes leading to and from it. And most of the plants grow in here. These media-filled grow beds, for the entire system, including all the stuff outside of the greenhouse, this is probably where you're going to see most of the food production, or at least biomass production, by weight. And water also cycles back and forth between the fish tank and a duckweed tank. The idea of the duckweed tank is that it will produce food that you can feed to the fish and possibly to other animals like chickens or some other things. And it could also possibly be blended in with some other things to form fish pellets. But the water is going into here And also this can act as a settlement tank. You could make it a circular tank, and large particles of fish poop or whatever other waste is in the water, some of that could settle in there. And in with those, I also have a drawing of a clam, because I think if you grow clams or freshwater mussels in there, other filter feeders, that could help maintain the water quality and also add an additional food source, meat source. Inside of the greenhouse, I've also included a spirulina tank, because I think this could be a good staple food for emergencies. There's a lot that you could read about spirulina or videos that you could watch. Um, this would have to be separate from the rest of the system because it has different water requirements from other things, and you wouldn't really want to have algae filling up your fish pond anyway. Connected to the greenhouse on the outside, it should have compost bins. These could be all the way around the base or possibly just in some spots. But what this can do is take material from the plants that are, whatever you're not going to use, and use that to heat the greenhouse and also produce soil. And you can also grow worms in there. And another thing connected to the greenhouse would be a bee box or a beehive. And the idea of this is that the bees can share a climate with the greenhouse, and it can be positioned right at the wall so that the bees can choose to go into the greenhouse or outside, just depending on where the bees think the plants that they want to go to are. And this can pollinate the plants that are in your greenhouse for you. And of course also produce honey. Over here we have a chicken pen, also backed up against the greenhouse. I would think that you would normally not want to let your chickens actually go in the greenhouse, but sometimes you could, to control insects or do other things in there. But the idea of having it backed up against the greenhouse would be that it can share a climate with the greenhouse, which of course the whole idea of a greenhouse is that you have a more controlled atmosphere. You're keeping out wind and rain and controlling the temperature, controlling how much water is getting in and out, and you're not letting in all the insects and stuff to the same degree that you do when it's outside. Still some stuff gets in. But anyway, the chickens share the climate with the greenhouse, while they also have an outside area. And depending on where you are, what wild animals you have in the area, you could let them roam free. But in the system that I'm going to build, or that I'm planning to build at this point, there would be a risk of them getting eaten by something. So they would need an enclosure. But they can pick through the ground, eat insects and stuff, and this is one place where minerals that would normally be just gradually depleted from the system are going to be added back in. As they eat insects and other things that they find, they also eat some rocks and worms and things. Plants, they do eat a lot of plants. All of that goes into the tissue of the chicken and chicken eggs and the chicken poop, which the chicken poop gets added over to the compost. And after you eat the eggs, the shells also get added to the compost, which is a source of minerals that's going into the system. And you don't necessarily have to add the egg shells directly into the compost. You could grind them up and add them into the water as nutrient supplements for your water and the things living in it. And then of course you can eat the eggs and meat from chickens. All the power for this system can come from solar or wind or other sources, but the idea would be that all the power could be produced on site. And these two are other important aspects which would probably be in the greenhouse to share the controlled environment, but I just drew them outside for this representation. The first is a worm farm. This is basically just a box with dirt and scraps of wood chips, paper, plant waste, and other things. So you can take like wood chips and chicken poop into there, pieces of plants that you don't want into there, some of the compost into there, and out of it you're getting worms which go to chickens and to the fish pond. And you can possibly also sell worms, but I don't know how well that would work out. And the other one is a cricket farm. Crickets reproduce very fast if they have the right conditions and grow very fast. You can feed them different plant waste, or not even necessarily waste. You could feed them, normal things off of the plant to eat. And crickets would be eaten by the chickens and the fish mostly. They can also be eaten directly by humans if you are into that. I probably would try it. I'm not sure how well it would actually taste or what it would be like. It could be good, who knows. But their shells contain nutrients that will be needed in the water and are good for the fish. But to get those nutrients, you have to take minerals from outside the system and bring it in and give it to the crickets. That's another place that minerals come into the system to be replenished. And the final food producing part of this system is soil farming. The drawing just shows normal traditional farming, but there would be some of that, like growing potatoes, wheat, corn, that sort of thing, but probably not very much because that stuff is pretty easy to grow. Like if you grow even a small area of it, you get a lot, like enough to last a small family or just one person, a long time. And it's also cheap to buy if you need to. But a larger aspect of what I'd be doing with soil farming is permaculture. There's a lot that you can read about that, but the basic idea is you design the whole system of plants and the shape of the landscape to control moisture content and wind and shade and sun and produce nutrients or consume the right nutrients so that each plant is interacting with all of the other plants to have the best growth and to control what type of plants are there. So it kind of goes along with a similar idea to the greenhouse system where it's mostly automated, where you set up the environment to begin with, and then if you've set it up properly, then it should be pretty much just functioning the way that you want it to without a lot of work or maintenance or adding things to it. So before I go to the next picture, I'll just show you all of the main interactions that go on in here. So first, plants grow. These obviously go to the human. Some of it is going to the chickens. Some of it is going to the crickets. Some of it is going to the compost. Here, I'll zoom in on this area to fill in all of this. Duckweed grows in here, gets fed to the fish, and probably some goes to the compost. And depending on what you're growing in the grow beds, some of that can go to the fish. Fish go to the human and also to the compost. Spirulina goes to the human. Bees, they just kind of do their own thing. You don't really have to worry about. I'm not an expert on keeping bees, but I think for the most part, as long as they have plants and water and the right climate, they're fine. You don't really have to add anything to them, so basically honey goes to the human and they help with the plant growth and reproduction. The chickens, they take in the plant material and material from whatever they just find on the ground and decide to eat. And they put out compost, meat, and eggs. And they also improve the soil in some ways. They add fertilizer to it and they keep it scratched up, dig around in it, and eat stuff out of it. Crickets, they take in plants, of course also some water. They produce food for the chickens and for the fish. Worms take in compost. We'll just say compost. They take in some other stuff. They produce food for the chickens and the fish. These plants in the soil go to the human, chickens. You know what, we'll just leave out that aspect of it. So they basically go to the human and to the compost. And then I didn't draw in a composting toilet, but this is how the minerals get cycled back through the system in the long run. So human poops, that gets made into compost. And I would recommend a separate compost area for this so that you don't use it, you know, straight into the system with strong, dangerous bacteria in it. But anyway, it goes to compost in a separate pile. And you can put it like at the base of a tree or something. And in the long run, compost from that tree and just using that soil over, the nutrients find their way back through the system, at least some of them do. So there's a lot of interactions here, but basically it's a whole web of things that are all benefiting all of the other aspects of the system and helping it run more smoothly. For example, the plant growth in the main plant bed, I'll just super highlight it, wouldn't be nearly as much if the fish are not getting the nutrients that they need from the crickets and worms and the duckweed and possibly from some other sources. So I'll just clear out all these arrows. So that should, for the most part, provide, you know, a self-sustaining, and most of it should be pretty automatable. So it'd be a food supply that doesn't really take much inputs of any kind, just for the most part self-sustaining. But what it does require is air and water and sunlight and some minerals. But most of the materials that make up an animal, like a human, come from air and water. the water would come mostly from rainwater collection or from a well, and also from devices like this, which is a drawing of a fog collecting screen. If there's fog or humid air that's cooling off, then you can get water to collect on a screen and drip down into a gutter, where you can then direct it into some sort of a storage tank. And rainwater collection can happen from gutters around, well, positioned low on the building on that large greenhouse, or on any other building that you have. The surface area, or I guess it would be cross-sectional area as viewed from above, adds up pretty quick as you start putting in buildings, and you can collect a lot of water. Maybe you could also collect it off of solar panels. One thing that's very important to think about is controlling the temperature, because like I mentioned, the whole idea of having the greenhouse is to have a controlled climate so you can grow your food all year round, like it's, the ideal growing season the whole time. Controlling the air temperature, it's going to fluctuate up and down some unless you have a very well insulated greenhouse. As soon as you get some light coming in, it will heat up pretty quickly in a greenhouse, and when there's not that much sunlight coming in, it cools off pretty quickly to similar to the outside temperature. But if you can maintain the water temperature where you want, depending on the type of fish, it could be like 60 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, or maybe a little warmer for certain fish. I think that evaporation of the water should keep the greenhouse temperature pretty much stable, because the energy that's stored in the warmth of the air is hardly anything compared to the amount of energy that will be stored in the water, and the water temperature is not going to change very quickly as long as you have a large enough water tank. And having it set into the ground, I think, is a big advantage for controlling the temperature. If you can't control your water temperature, that's going to be a serious problem. So that's something that has to be thought about. For cooling the water, my plan for the system that I want to build is to pump it through long hoses that lead down into the ground. And this can just sink the heat into the earth and return the water at the temperature of the dirt. Of course, that's going to heat up the dirt, and it won't work as well if you're using hot water and you keep pumping the water through for a long period of time. The dirt's just going to heat up, but it will dissipate eventually, and as long as your water is not getting ridiculously hot, it should be alright. Also, if the water temperature does get really low, like it's threatening to freeze, that could pretty easily prevent it from freezing, just pumping it through the soil like that. For heating the water, I think solar water heating is the way to go there. Depending on where you are, like if you're in a warm area, then a very cheap and simple water heater made from like a black hose inside of covered with like greenhouse plastic or something probably would be fine. Or if you're in a colder area, then you might want to invest in the evacuated tubes, solar water heating tubes that work much better. For adjusting the air temperature, there are some pretty simple solutions. The most common, and maybe the best, is just to have some windows that open. And I think having a screen in the window is a very good idea, because you can keep out whatever moths or other things are going to come in there that lay eggs that turn into little caterpillars that eat all your plants. It's best to try to keep that type of stuff out, but some will get in, I'm sure. And another solution is to have retractable shade cloths. that can be drawn up over the parts of your building that let in light. These solutions are for cooling the air, of course. For heating, basically you just close everything, let in as much light as you can, and if there is light, then it will heat up pretty well. If it's a greenhouse, the sunlight warms it up pretty fast. If that's not enough, you can use electricity to heat it if you need to, or you could have a fireplace or something in there. If you're to meet the agenda of trying to have it be as automated as possible, it might be better to run it on, like instead of a fireplace that runs on wood, you could have a fireplace that runs on vegetable oil, because it would be a lot easier to automate that than a wood fireplace. Another thing, if just light coming in and sealing it is not heating it enough, then you could use a system like this to have, a large tank of hot water or even hot oil that you can pump through some type of radiators inside the building, so that it will just give off the heat from the hot liquid into the air. And again, for heating, just regulating the water temperature should do a lot for keeping the temperature stable, especially since the water is flowing in and out of the plant beds the whole time. These should stay about the temperature of the water, so if you've got, like, even if it's 30 degrees outside, if you've got 75-degree water, your greenhouse is probably going to be warm, relatively warm, and your plants are probably not going to have any problem.